All right, let's talk about Dr. Fauci. So Dr. Fauci may have given his final COVID press conference, which I'm sure you all watched with rapt attention the other day, before he sails off into the sunset as the highest paid government employee right now. I think of all time, he's the highest paid government employee of all time, Dr. Fauci is. And, you know, he's still talking, though, partially under oath during a deposition and partially on television running his mouth. First, his deposition. On Wednesday, Missouri Attorney General Eric Schmidt, along with Louisiana Attorney General Jeff Landry, deposed Fauci. Now, we were watching this very, very closely. The Gateway Pundit has done an amazing job on this. Jim Hoft and the team over there, they should get medals of freedom for their coverage of this. They're that amazing. This was all part of a lawsuit to determine what level of collusion there was between the Biden administration, Dr. Fauci, big tech companies, censoring content, telling them what to promote, what not to promote, all of it, making phone calls. Hey, Zuckerberg, do this, do that. What kind of stuff to push, what kind of stuff to hide, suppress, like, you know, monoclonal antibodies and other naturally occurring remedies. Or stuff that had been tried and true for many, many decades that were suddenly suppressed and hidden from the American people. Censoring voices, speaking out against vaccine mandates. Like, what was Dr. Fauci involved with? What was the Biden administration involved with as it relates to big tech? So he was deposed. And we already know from investigative reports from Dr. Peter McCullough, John Leake, who've written an amazing book, by the way. I encourage you all to read it. And you should all check out my full interview with Dr. Peter McCullough and John Leake on their book about COVID. It's an unbelievable piece of investigative journalism. Really, really amazing about the silencing and how it was so incredibly strong, suppressing any long-proving medications and alternative medicine treatments like monoclonal antibodies, treatments, etc. So Fauci was deposed.
Well, Peter actually mentioned that was one of his favorite interviews to do, didn't you say? Like because he was able to
yes.
say what he wanted.
Yeah, he got to like actually speak on our interview, like he and John. So we spoke for about an hour, and you can find it on Rumble. We couldn't even post it on YouTube, so it's on our Rumble channel. If you go to rumble.com/redacted and check out our interview with Dr. Peter McCullough. So because of that, because of their journalism and because of the journalism of a few other great journalists out there who are covering this story, to much, much personal reputational damage, by the way, Fauci was deposed on Wednesday, and the Gateway Pundit's Jim Hoft, who has been banned from Twitter, right? Like these guys who cover this story get banned, blocked, maligned, reputationally destroyed, when we should be holding these people up as heroes. So Jim Hoft and attorney John Burns were present at the deposition. They tracked all of the questions and answers for 7 hours. Can you imagine sitting there listening to Dr. Fauci for 7 hours, tracking every word he says? Now, the thing is, he's under oath during a deposition. So he's got to tell the truth here. And the thing is with a deposition, then, of course, it can be used against him later because now it's public. Like you said under this deposition in this lawsuit 3 years ago. Here it is, your sworn testimony. They're national heroes for covering this. They sat there for 7 hours and listened to Fauci. So what did we learn during this deposition? Well, we learned a lot, actually. One of the big pieces, though, shows us where Fauci got his inspiration for these draconian lockdowns. China. We learned that Fauci sent his longtime partner, Clifford Lane, to China in February to assess the situation. Lane was over the moon about the strict Chinese measures and published the idea on Dr. Fauci and pushed the idea, on Dr. Fauci, who didn't question anything and went along with it. So here is from the deposition. I'm going to read from the deposition now from John Sauer. So Mr. Lane, after returning from the trip, said the Chinese were managing this in a very structured, organized way. Is that correct? Did you discuss Mr. Lane's experience on the trip with him when he got back from the World Health Organization trip? By the way, it was a WHO trip. That should tell you all you need to know right there. So Dr. Fauci responds, the answer is, I did. Dr. Lane was very impressed about how a clinical public health standpoint, the Chinese were handling the isolation, the contact tracing, the building of facilities to take care of people. And that's what I believed he meant when he said they were managing this in a very structured, organized way. Sauer says, Oh, so he drew the conclusion that there might have to be extreme, in his word, measures to mandate social distancing to bring the outbreak under control. Is that correct? Fauci, that's what this is implying. Yes. He did discuss with me that the Chinese 19 had a very organized way of trying to contain the spread in Wuhan and elsewhere. He didn't get a chance to go to Wuhan, but he was in Beijing, and I believe other cities, at least Beijing, and he mentioned that they had a very organized and well-regimented way of handling this outbreak, end quote.
Whoa. Now, Chinese 19, that's very racist. Trump called it the Wuhan virus. That is very racist to call it the China 19.
The China 19 virus?
Yeah. Come on now. What's with the
China
double standards?
19. So, this is an amazing admission, right? Stunning, actually. Dr. Aaron Karardi, a plaintiff in the case, posted a long thread on Twitter on this Fauci admission. So here's Dr. Am I saying his last name right? Karardi? I always say this name wrong. So, Doctor, if you're watching, I apologize.
Karardi. That's how I would say it, Karardi.
Karardi. So Dr. Karardi says, from our deposition of Fauci yesterday, remember, he's a plaintiff in this case. So this doctor is a plaintiff in this case. He says, okay, update. From our deposition of Fauci yesterday on the Missouri versus Biden case, Fauci confirmed that in February 2020, Fauci sent Clifford Lane, his deputy, at the National Institutes of NIA. I always forget those last two letters. NAIAD. Infectious diseases, right? As the United States representative for the World Health Organization delegation to China. Lane convinced Fauci that we should emulate China's lockdowns. The CCP had announced China had contained the virus through the draconian lockdowns, a claim now known to be false, given the China pattern of falsified information. Lane and Fauci should have approached this claim with skepticism. Lockdowns were wholly untested and unprecedented, he says. So then he goes on to say, as our lawyer, Lefty Lockdowns 1, put it, Fauci was apparently willing to base his lockdown advocacy on the observations of a single guy relying on reports from a dictator. Not exactly a double-blind randomized trial level of evidence, or indeed any level of evidence at all.
Well, you don't have to. When you're science, you don't have to do double-blind randomized trials of any kind.
Yeah.
If you were science, Clayton, you would know that.
He is the science, so he didn't have to question any of that. And by the way, this guy Lane, he didn't even go to Wuhan, as was admitted by Fauci. He was in Beijing, telling him secondhand. So think about that. Our lives are upended. Hundreds of thousands of businesses out, crushed. Thousands of people dying in their homes under draconian positions. Families not able to go to hospitals to see their dying loved ones, like as in the case of my father. David, Philip as well, with their grandmother, having to look through glass on the outside of a hospital window because you're not even allowed in the hospital with a dying parent because of these clowns.
Well, it's like this guy. What's this guy? This guy's sitting in his hotel. He's on the phone with Fauci. He's like, and he's not even there. He's like, hey, what's going on? He's like, I don't know. They're like, I think they're locking people down. They might be. I don't know. I heard somebody say that they were like, some people are saying they're doing this or whatever. Fauci's like, okay, got it. Like, no.
Yeah,
no
and it's
data, no nothing, just...
Well, no, because it's a WHO trip. Like, it's a WHO-sponsored trip. Like, we want you to go to China to see how they're handling these lockdowns. They've been doing a great job. We're going to fund this trip from the World Health Organization. We're going to send you there so you come back. And it's like how these Hollywood people will pay for people to go on junkets to review their movie. I remember a few years, just as an example, I know this is an aside, but like in Iceland, remember that there was like a Jake Gyllenhaal movie about the end of the world, and they filmed a lot of it in Iceland. It was like this like ice movie that like the whole world was in ice or something. I don't know what it was.
Yeah, New York. New York was like an ice scape.
Yeah. So they filmed a lot of it in Iceland, and they flew all of these like reporters from all of these like local affiliates. They just flew them to Iceland. They put them up. They flew them to Iceland. They put them up in a nice hotel. They put them like in an ice bar. They did all this stuff. Of course, they're going to review the movie well, right? And they're going to do interviews with the actors at the junkets and stuff. So they're paying for them to go do all this stuff. So the WHO is flying these guys to China for all of this so that they can be on the same page with these lockdowns. That's where these lockdowns came from anyway. I mean, it was all part of the WHO's plan. So days after Lane returned, Aaron writes at the end of this tweet, the WHO published its report praising China's strategy. China's uncompromising and rigorous use of non-pharmaceutical measures, lockdowns to contain transmission of the COVID-19 virus in multiple settings provides vital lessons for the global response, says the WHO. Looks like they had this report ready to go. How convenient that it was published almost immediately upon his return. We sent a guy, we just did our due diligence, we're back, good, publish, hit publish. What's weird is, though, that I could have sworn that Fauci told us that he never pushed for lockdowns at all, that he had nothing to do with it, and he wants to remind all of us that he didn't push for lockdowns. Remember this?
You had said a number of times, Doctor, on this show as well, that your response to COVID might not have been perfect, but it was in the times and the fast moments in which you lived and were making those decisions. So looking back at some of those decisions, including masks, you were first opposed to them, then you embraced them, the severity of the epidemic itself and completely shutting down virtually the entire American economy. Do you regret particularly the last one, the shutdown, the sweeping shutdown that some said made things worse?
No, I don't, Neil. And in fact, I think we need to make sure that your listeners understand I didn't shut down anything. There was a lot of consideration among the White House task force that we were reaching a point where the hospitals, such as in New York City and other places, were being strained to the point of practically being overwhelmed. And when Dr. Birx and I came with the proposal that we take 15 days to essentially get to the point where we slow, if not shut some things down, not completely, and the record will show
that you're lying. That's what the record will show. That's what it'll show. So we recommended a 15-day lockdown, but I didn't do anything to shut anything down. And it was because of the advice of going to China where we got this idea in the first place. And we really
and that's because we had to flatten the curve.
15 days to flatten the curve.
Yeah.
15 days to flatten the curve. So, of course, he later admitted that the lockdowns were a great plan to get everyone vaccinated. That was always part of the plan. It wasn't really about slowing anything down. And if you really wanted to slow down what was happening in the hospitals, you would have paid attention to doctors like Dr. Peter McCullough, right, who actually had their own I want to say cocktail, their own protocol that they had come up with at Baylor and had shown that in their treating of patients, were able to get people away from respirators, not even going to the hospital, and getting on respirators. Getting on a respirator ended up being a death sentence. And the way that you force that on people, the way that ended up being worse is by putting people under lockdowns in closed quarters.
Well, of course, I was talking about this. On Locals is the fact that, like, they're saying that their excuse for all this is the data kept changing, the science kept changing. But like you and I both know, the people that we followed from the beginning, none of them know what they were saying changed. It's just that the science, the so-called science that was moving all around, came back to where they were from the very beginning.
Right. Well, like we just saw in Canada, right? Like Justin Trudeau, they're like, hey, can you guys give us any science that shows that this is necessary? It's like, no, the science hasn't changed. We can't give you any science to show that there's a mandate needed for vaccines. Like, we can't.
Well, and the releasing of the Pfizer documents made that even harder for them to do.
Right, yeah.
Like, if those would have been hidden, they probably could have got away with it a bit more.
Oh, and they tried to, of course, as we know, right? Mm-hmm. The goal was to have those court documents, those files sealed for 75 years, so we wouldn't get to see them. We'd all be dead by then. So, of course, Dr. Fauci was lying in that last clip. He later admitted that lockdowns were a great plan to get everyone vaccinated. We use lockdowns as a tool to vaccinate people. Watch.
But lockdown has its consequences. You use lockdowns to get people vaccinated so that when you open up, you won't have a surge of infections because you're dealing with an immunologically naive population to the virus because they've not really been exposed because of the lockdown.
Yeah. So you use the lockdown as a cudgel, right? That's the purpose. You use it as a cudgel, and you force people to get vaccinated. As Jim Hoft puts it, and I think he puts it very well, Fauci stripped Americans of their constitutional rights based on highly suspect results by the Chinese. He admitted this, and, this is what he did. He stripped Americans of their constitutional rights. And then on CBS, so he's not done talking. So he did this deposition, and then he finishes this press conference last week, and you think, this guy, go away. We don't want to hear from you again. And then CBS has the audacity to put this liar on the air again this weekend. They can't get enough of this guy. The anchor wanted to know about the origins of COVID and why we don't know. Now, you'll recall, this was the same question that was thrown at him last week before Thanksgiving by that reporter from Africa who got shut down and yelled at by Jean-Pierre, the White House press secretary. How dare you ask that question of him? He's like, he is the head of the infectious diseases agency here. Like, he's the guy to know. He was funding this. We got to ask him this question. And she yelled at him. So this question was asked on CBS Face the Nation. And here was his unbelievable response. It was Trump's fault. Watch.
What happens is that if you look at the anti-China approach that clearly the Trump administration had right from the very beginning, and the accusatory nature, the Chinese are going to flinch back and say, no, I'm sorry, we're not going to talk to you about it, which is not correct.
But they're not talking to the Biden administration about it either.
Exactly. I think that horse is out of the barn, and they're very suspicious of anybody trying to accuse them. We need to have an open dialogue with their scientists and our scientists. Keep the politics out of it and let the scientists, because these are scientists that we've known for decades and we've collaborated with them.
Oh, I see. It's Trump's fault. It's all Trump's fault then in this scenario. I mean, do you hear this guy? Like, this is the reason we can't find out about the origins of COVID, because God knows I'm not going to tell you about it, even though I know. But he went on this interview to say, I think it's all natural anyway. Like, I think it's naturally occurring. But we're not going to find out the origins of COVID because Trump scared the Chinese by making fun of them. Okay. Really? So I hope Republicans get a chance to, and they say they will, they're going to hold his feet to the fire. There's going to be hearings on this. He says last week that he will testify if he has to. Someone in our Rumble chat says, no, we don't want him to go away. We don't want him to stop talking. We need answers, and he needs to be held accountable. And I agree with that. I don't want him to disappear. I want them to hold him accountable, and I want them to get to the bottom of this. I think one of the greatest crimes that's ever been perpetrated on humanity unfolded under his watch. And I think it's worth going back and reading RFK's book, RFK Jr.'s book on him, the real Anthony Fauci, watching the documentary if you don't want to read the book. But it's really, really troubling. So I hope we do get some answers. I hope the Republicans have enough balls to actually get them up on the stand and get some clear answers on this.